Now it is time for us to do the
history file. And I don't know what number it is either, probably.
We do not know. Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, happy January.
I don't think
whatever.
we've done a history files yet this year, have
no,
we?
I guess this would be our premiere. For
This is the maiden voyage.
For 2024, and we're here on Square Bluff in our remote kitchen studio again, because what's it like out, Mary?
It's 0 degrees outside right now, and I have like 17 layers on. So, you know, I would be like that one kid that falls over in that one movie and can't get up.
I remember those
I had a red snowsuit just like that.
I had a snowsuit that was the same way. I hated it because you could hardly walk in it.
No, and if it got wet, it weighed like 900 pounds.
Yeah, at least. So.
Definitely. No, it's very, very cold. The wind chill factor, they said, is 28 below zero.
Me, I got to set our timer.
Interruptions.
I gotta set our timer.
Nancy.
Okay.
Yes, because we're at the remote studio, as you can tell.
Yep.
And Nancy does have some greenery, which helps us keep our sanity this time of the year. I have a hat head, and I'll probably, be boiling by the time we're done with this episode.
And I just told Mary that I might have to have Larry build us a separate room on the house here as our studio where we have everything all controlled and perfect.
Absolutely, because there's a very, very important game that's going to take place shortly.
Yes.
So we are going to jump into this edition of the History Files.
And here we go.
And I have no idea where we're going.
That's because, like I always say, if I let her know what the is going on, then she just gets sloppy and lazy, and she just doesn't.
I pull up my computer and she cuts and pastes me.
She is just not on her edge then.
Nancy rescued me today because I'm working on my farm paperwork. Yay! Tax time, everyone. Yay.
So we're going to Mary for our subject today, and I think it's
here we go.
I think it's fascinating.
It's fascinating. Here we go.
Yes, but
I have no idea where we're going with this conversation.
Give her a clue right now.
Oh boy!
This show is going to require.
Oh, brother. Here we go. She has a bag.
It's going to require
Mary.
The
horns. Oh, she wants me to be the Norse.
The Norse goddess.
I do have Polish lineage. I do have Polish lineage. We maybe got to talk about recognizing the Poles once in a while.
We will. This happens to be a show.
Okay. Here we go.
It's a great interest to Scandinavians.
Yes, Scandinavians.
But I've only got 10%, and she's got a lot more DNA.
We don't know because they haven't poked me in the finger yet.
Yeah, well, anyway, Mary.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the Kensington Runestone?
I have.
What do you know about it?
I know that it was a farmer. Do I really need to wear the hat?
You look so good at it.
I know I do. Woo! All I'd have to do is put on my heavy bundle jacket, and I would look just like one of those folks. Anyway.
She could be a spear maiden with her pitchfork, yeah.
Oh, go to the halls of Valhalla.
Right.
Where the youth shall inherit the earth or something like that. I have no idea. Okay, the Runestone is actually a farmer was plowing or working the land. And this was a long, long time ago. And he came across this huge rock in his field. And in an effort to clear the land, he pulled it out of the ground.
Yeah.
And it was quite an effort to pull it out of the ground. And then, of course, as he's looking at it, he notices these very, very strange, eclectic markings. And then you fast forward and scientists got involved and a bunch of stuff happened. And those details I do not know. But they say it was something that happened further back in time than when like Columbus and the Mayflower, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and you've pretty much summed up, pretty well there.
I got her this time
What
around.
happened was in 1898, there was a Swedish immigrant farmer, and he was over on his farm on the western side of Minnesota, near a little town called Kensington, pretty small, probably about the size of Ettrick.
Okay, on the far western
Right,
side,
right.
up against the Dakotas.
Almost, yeah.
Okay.
The closest city to him of any size is Alexandria.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's over there near the border. He and his little 10-year-old boy, they were working on his farm, and they were up on a slight rise, and they were grubbing out stumps.
Oh, okay. So there's a little corrected history.
Well, just filled in. And there was, as they took down this popple tree and they were trying to, get the roots out of there, they noticed that the roots were wrapped around this stone, this big stone, which was strange, but they got it out of there, and it was kind of a rectangular, and it weighed over 200 pounds.
So that's a kind of a sizable piece of rock.
And I'm not sure if the farmer's name was Olus Ullman, and he had been an immigrant from Sweden,
Okay.
and they noticed these markings on the stone.
Ah, I got that part right.
The little boy, I think, actually was the one that noticed it. Well, they thought that maybe that was Indian carvings and things. And
From the Native Americans.
yeah, so there wasn't a big stir or anything right away, right off the bat. And at first they just took it into town, and it was exhibited for a couple years at the bank, I guess it was.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting
Yeah,
place
nothing
to
really happened, and
put an archaeological treasure.
they thought that it was probably, he called it an Indian almanac. That's
Oh,
what they called it.
okay.
And that's kind of where that all
So
stood.
they gave all the credit to the Native Americans.
Right.
Okay.
So it wasn't until about 10 years later that the first scientific examination of this stone was made. And the stone it still is this size, 30 by 16 by 6 inches, weighs 202 pounds.
Okay.
And the type of rock it's made out of is called gray whack. Have you ever heard of that?
That's something I have never heard of.
Gray whack. Yeah, it's a funny name, but there is a type of stone called a gray whack. And so they had somebody that actually came, a professor from the University of Minnesota, and his name was Olus Breda, and they looked at it, and they said, well, no, these aren't Indian carvings. We think that these are runes. And you know what runes are?
That is in reference to the ruse from like the Norway region.
Well, runes is actually just an old Germanic alphabet. Is what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that had been used up in the northern part of Europe and Scandinavia.
See, you learn something new every day.
Yeah, that's what runes are, and so then they got people who started looking at it because they said, wait a second, they think these are actually runes on here that have been carved into this rock. And this Breda, he looked at it for quite a while, and how many people there could actually read, runes?
Right,
not
right.
very many.
Well, it probably was a dead language, right? Sort of.
Well, it was different. Let's put it that way.
Were people still writing it?
Runes? No, not really. But this kind of shows you what runes look like here.
Okay.
With the top lines, those are the runes, and that would be what our regular, Romantic type alphabet would look like in comparison.
Okay.
So they finally got somebody, well, actually a couple people, set about translating these runes on this rock, and they figured out that this is what it actually said. They said it's 8 Gotlanders, which is a part of Sweden, and 22 Northmen on this exploration journey from Vinland far to the west. We had a camp by 2 shelters, 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were fishing one day, and after we came home, we found 10 men red from blood and dead. And then it said, Ave Maria, saved from evil. And then on the side of the stone, it also went on and said, there are 10 men by the inland sea to look after our ships, 14 days' journey from this peninsula or island. And the year was 1362.
Wow.
And that's pretty much word for word how they translated it.
Holy cow.
So then it was really got to be, you know, a real hornet's nest. And it became, you know, the mystery of the Runestone. And were there actually Vikings up there in Minnesota way before Columbus ever set sail?
Hit the East Coast. Wow.
And it was kind of good timing because right around the turn of the century, there was renewed interest, especially in Scandinavia. Remember we did the church on
Right.
the Stave Church in the White City? That was the big World's Fair they had in Chicago.
Right.
And Norway had actually sent a replica of a Viking ship and had it sail to New York from somewhere in Norway just to prove that it could be done.
Wow.
And they had the Stave Church there. And anyway, there was a lot of interest right there. And in the ships and different things. And this movement was called Romantic Nationalism, which means even though you've come from another country and you're here in America, you're very proud of your beginnings.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So nothing wrong with that.
No, absolutely not. We should all recognize where we come from.
But it just, pretty soon the word got around that this was a hoax. People thought that maybe this was a hoax. And it got to be, the Norwegians were saying that this was a hoax perpetrated by this Swede, you know, to make the Swedes, like, look better than the Norwegians.
Oh, because they were the ones that found the stone.
Right, because Oman was a Swede. But the Swedes were saying no, that they thought this was something the Norwegians were doing to also make them look like they were the big guys that got here.
Jeez Louise, more race wars over a rock with some carvings on it.
Yeah, so it got kind of
Slipping around.
nasty. Anyway.
People behave. Will you behave?
By 1911, they had actually sent the rock, I imagine by train, down to the Northwest University in Chicago.
Okay.
But they weren't really able to figure out much from looking at it. They really couldn't do much.
That was
with
above
it.
their science level?
Yeah, especially back then. This is 1911, so they don't have a lot of the toys that they have these days.
Technology. It's not a technology.
And then there was a man by the name of Hjalmar Holland, and he was a historian and an author, and he got a hold of the stone. He said that Olaf Oman gave him the stone, may or may not be, although the Minnesota Historical Society did end up with the stone eventually, and they said they had a receipt showing that they had paid Oman $10 for the stone.
Okay.
So he didn't make big money off of this.
Not as much as a meteorite. I guess they pay quite a few dollars for those.
And in 1911, when some other, I guess maybe it was back in Minnesota, other scholars examined the stone. And they said this inscription was 500 years old at least. At
least 500.
Yep.
And so in the 1800s, you take off 500, that gives you that 1300-ish.
1362 is what it had been dated.
Okay.
And there were other people that looked at it that were scholars as well, and they said it looked like it was at least 100 years old.
Okay.
And so when I was researching this, I got onto like YouTube, and there are all kinds of things on YouTube about this Kensington Runestone. And the one lady that they interviewed, she was an expert at carving on stones.
Okay.
And she was showing how you would actually carve the letters.
Okay.
And she thought that it was absolutely a non-hoax, that it was authentic.
Did they use metal tools or did they use stone tools?
No, she was pretty sure it was metal tools. And she was the one, she said, I think it's just a message board. that
Oh.
these Vikings or whatever had actually been there, and they left this stone behind for other people to know what their situation was.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Did they dig around further to see if they were able to find any body remnants?
Oh,
Because if there were
gosh.
10 people that they found, bloodied and dead, you would think, but the earth reclaims
would've been a long
her
time.
treasures. Right.
I don't think that they ever found any bodies, and if they went back and did any digging around where he had originally found it, I never did hear that they did that.
Okay.
And by that time, he might have gotten all the stumps out and was farming it.
Right. And
You
then
don't
who
know.
knows if
Yeah.
I mean, because of the tradition, typically, like in the Norse type history, they burned their dead.
Yeah, I suppose when they could.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But who knows?
yeah. Now, this oldest Oman, like I say, he was a Swedish immigrant. He had come from Sweden and come to this country and married a lady. They had 9 children.
Ooh.
And he had this farm there. This part of Minnesota is not great
No.
farmland. He
No,
had a
it's
lot
not.
of swamp and everything. But still, he seemed to be a reputable type person. And
He kind of looks like a serious fella.
yeah. So then, after a while, all this other stuff kind of got in the way. A man by the name of John Gran in 1967 said that his father had told him that Oman had carved this,
Oh,
runestone. However, that's totally incidental. I mean, there's this like, well, he told me, and then he told me, that
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So that doesn't really have a lot of veracity.
That could be kind of like that neighbor over there shot my buck,
Right,
kind of a
right.
thing.
Yeah, they would never
Okay.
hold up in court. Let's put it that way. And then that there is some kind of, the story was here were these Scandinavians way in Minnesota, and they figured that their route, and it was very possible that they would have come down from
Like the St. Lawrence Seaway and through
either
the
that
Great
or they
Lakes.
saw it probably from Hudson Bay.
Oh,
And had come down, one of the rivers, or come down the Red River and wound up in Minnesota, or
Wow.
possibly the Great Lakes. They don't know. But that's just,
well, it's speculation
it is
unless they
speculation.
find more rocks
Yeah.
that have inscriptions that says, go 3 moons ahead and then
Yeah.
turn left, right?
Well,
By the big
yeah.
oak tree.
So they're looking around for reasons why there would have been Vikings at that time way over in Minnesota. And they did find that in 1577, they found a record of some men who had returned to Norway from the Arctic in 1364.
Wow, from the Arctic.
Right. Well,
So they were traveling hard.
Yep. And one was a priest from Greenland whose name was Ivar Bardason. And he turns up in a lot of Norwegian
Wow.
records. He apparently got around, and
That name, I've heard that name before.
not one of your neighbors.
No, it's from you, silly.
Ivar Bardason. And he, like I say, he turned up in other records and letters and things. And then in 1637, there was a bishop in Iceland. And he had written a history of the Viking occupation of Greenland, which was for almost 800 years.
Wow, I didn't realize it was
I
that
know
long.
I thought it was this, they were there for a couple seasons and said this is it and left, but that's not true. There was quite, they figure 5,000 people or more that were living in, Vikings that were
Wow.
living in Greenland.
That's incredible, isn't it?
But what happened too was when they first started settling Greenland, and that was with Eric the Red, that it was actually a time when the earth was having a little warming spell.
Okay.
And so they were able to raise cattle and some sheep, and they couldn't grow many crops, but they could make a pretty good living. And they would send things back to Iceland and Europe. There was a great demand for walrus tusks.
Oh, I suppose.
Like ivory, they would
Right,
do a
right.
lot of carving on it. And different like seal skins and things like that.
Huh.
So they did have an economy. But the weather did start to change. the weather pattern changed and it got colder and colder. And pretty soon, the Greenlanders were having a very hard time making a go of things.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And this Icelandic bishop said that he heard that the Greenlanders had fallen away from Christianity. They had,
Uh-oh. Well, you know, when
were
you're
isolated.
when your world is falling apart and you're freezing to death and you probably don't have the kind of nutrition you should be having,
No, I think they were pretty sickly.
you know, things probably go south.
So this bishop, anyway, he said that an expedition had been sent from Iceland to Greenland to figure out what happened to the Greenlanders. And he thought, well, from there, it's possible that they had gone on to, North America.
Right,
what we
right.
know of as Canada.
Find a new place.
Yep. And that was in 1342 when they had this
Oh.
expedition that went looking for these Greenlanders. And,
Wow, that's a long. I mean, they would have been looking how many years?
well, we don't know how long they were looking because what happened, this is bad timing. In 1350 is when Europe was in the midst of the Black Death.
Oh boy.
There were a lot of people dying, and it caused a lot of turmoil, and a lot of recordings and writings and everything kind of fell by the way then because things were in such bad shape.
But the date on the stone was what?
1362.
So that meant they would have been potentially looking for 40 years.
Well, yeah, they
Wow.
don't know. And plus that, there were always have been rumors about blonde Indians. Blonde,
Yes.
blue-eyed Indians.
Yes.
Just up the river, the next village up or whatever. Nobody ever found these tribes, but they always thought, well, maybe these guys, maybe there had been Vikings here, and they couldn't get back, or they didn't want to get back, and they just, joined up with
And
the
they
locals.
stained.
Yeah.
I mean, if your choice is to either die or go with, I would assume a lot of those folks decided to just go with.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh,
And there
that's
was an
interesting.
old trading route that was had been used for many years, way before Columbus, from around the Hudson Bay. That was an area where they did trade for skins and everything. Now, the only place that they have on the in North America, they have proven foundations and remains of a Viking settlement is the one up in Newfoundland.
Correct.
Yeah, called, I can't say it right, L'Anse Meadows anyway. But they did prove that there had been Vikings living there. Plus, Scandinavians wrote these things called sagas.
Right.
And they were usually written down, but they were meant to be recited.
Right. Oral stories.
Right, right. And there were sagas about, Vikings coming to North America and maybe not just staying up there in what they call Vinland, what they figure today is probably Newfoundland, but they might have gone down the coast.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they were explorers.
possible, right.
So what do you do if they tag you as an explorer? You obviously are going to explore. Now, I don't want to offshoot the direction that you're going with our history files here.
Uh-oh.
But there is, the name escapes me, but there's a place out east where they found some type of, they're not sure if it was a chapel, but they think it had that Nordic build, the way they looked at the rocks, that at the solstices,
Lined up.
the sun shines directly through it.
Well, there's all kinds of, when you start reading about these things, you find there's all kinds of things that they really have found all around the United States and Canada.
Well,
that
and
could
there may
been.
have actually been a ruin stone within a certain proximity of that. And I want to say it was like Maine or...
Yeah, I think it was Maine was where one of them were.
Right.
There was another one in West Virginia. And there were even some in Oklahoma, although that does seem a little far-fetched. But
Well,
I'm keeping an open mind here.
if they were following the waterways, is there a big river that flows through Oklahoma?
No,
That I don't know geographically off the top of my head. Sorry, folks. That's just a oops on my part with, the horns are sucking energy out of my brain.
Yeah, right. But when you look at the map, Greenland was not that far from Canada. They just had to go across this Davis Strait.
Right.
And they were on Baffin Island, which was pretty bleak. But then if you came down the coast of Labrador, and then you would get down by Newfoundland, where there were trees, and that was one thing that they were very short of in Greenland, was any kind of wood and trees.
Yes. And that was their primary building materials.
So they figure that, that the Vikings probably were taking advantage of, this wood and everything, and doing some other trapping and hunting and everything too.
Pillaging.
Well,
because the Vikings were known for pillaging.
Well, that's true.
Take your goods, take your women, right? That was the day where that, was part of the deal.
This was a problem with the Vikings, is that they did not tend to get along with the Native Americans.
Well, they didn't.
Or the Native Greenlanders. They did not. The reason that they did not stay at that farm that they found in Newfoundland was they got into it with the Native Americans, and they just did not seem to be able to get along with them. They were hard to get along with, especially they figure in Greenland, because eventually all the Vikings in Greenland, they don't know what happened to them. They disappeared or they moved somewhere else. But they probably would have been more successful if they would have adapted the lifestyle of the Inuit and the...
Right, play nice with your friends,
do
right?
What they do. Yeah, learn how to survive there, because Inuits didn't have a problem, but they said, these Scandinavians, they weren't going to do it.
Stubborn.
That.
Stubborn.
Very stubborn. And then
very stubborn.
Came back to bite them again.
Oh, brother.
But, so there's all kinds of people on the internet and all kinds of videos about the Kensington Runestone. And the thing that had me after a while just wanting to tear my hair out, because there'd be one really good presentation where somebody would come on and say, it's a hoax because of this, this, and this.
Okay, so scientifically laid out, this is a problem.
Right. Yep.
We shouldn't be buying this buffalo roar.
That's right. And then you look at another video, and that totally disputes this one. And this guy said, no, but have you looked at this? It goes on and on. There's a guy by the name of Scott Wolter, and he's a geologist.
Yeah, I've heard that name.
Okay. And he did, I thought, was a pretty convincing story of why he thought, that this was not a hoax.
That this is a real deal.
Right. And he had a real scientific explanation of why he thought it was real, the rock and how old it was and all this. Okay. But then there was another fellow I watched, and his name was Henrik Williamson. And he was actually a ruinologist.
Ooh, ruinologist.
And he said to Scott Wolter, oops.
Time's up. Show's over. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye. No, we're going to finish up.
We will finish up, folks. I promise.
Cliffhanger for the next episode.
He called Scott Wolter, he called him the Trump of geologists. Yeah, I'm just saying this is what he called them. Okay.
Geologist. And they have these cool little pickaxe things that are very, very sharp on one side, and they have like a little hammer on the other that you can knock at rock and try to sort fossils from actually true stone. And those guys going at war, geologists at war, that does not sound good at all, Nancy.
There's another fellow who is on YouTube quite a bit, a young, handsome guy called Jackson Crawford.
Oh.
And he's out in Ida, Colorado.
Okay.
Anyway, he got on there and absolutely tore this runestone to bits verbally, pointing out the inscription in great detail why it couldn't be real.
So what was his hypothesis that...
Well,
who did this?
He laid it all out. He said that the Swedish that it was written in was too modern, and there was a dot here that shouldn't have been, and another mark over here that they didn't use at 1362. I mean, he goes into great detail.
Okay. So how does he... is there like a science behind There must be, or historical records of some form.
He is a runologist. He studies, this is, that's his expertise, is studying old Scandinavian languages.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he said it was bull roar.
He said he thought it was a hoax. But there was one I watched the other night, and it was a guy that was talking that I thought made the most sense of all. And he said, well, I think what we have to keep in mind here is that it was possible. It's possible that it's a hoax, but it's also possible that it's authentic.
That it's not.
Because we know that the Vikings were incredible explorers.
Right.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't they have explored more earlier that our environment has just hidden in plain sight, Nancy, right?
They got around. I mean, their boats, the Viking boats, the way that they were built, they were supposed to be one of the most perfectly designed boats ever. They were light.
Yes.
They had a very shallow draft, which meant you could go way up rivers and things.
Right.
They were incredible navigators, and this was before they had, sextants or anything. They were just doing it by, looking at the stars and the sun.
There
and the
was
moon.
not a map application
Nope.
on their phones.
No, they couldn't just whip up that phone and say,
Where am I now? Get me home.
And there was another fellow that had an interesting take on things too, and his take was he wanted to talk about Olaf Ullman. So, could Olaf Ullman have done this? Well, he was Swedish, okay.
Okay.
And the other thing was that he thought, because he, in the census, Olaf Ullman had put down that he was a carpenter.
So he would have had chisel tools.
Yep, and he also had a small smithery forge on his farm.
Oh boy.
Where he did things. So that proved to this guy that this guy would have had the tools necessary to sit there and carve these runes. So
have they ever dated? Because typically rocks will age.
yeah, and
If they're outside and exposed,
this one
moss
was supposedly buried, face
underneath.
down. Yeah.
Underneath,
Right.
and then probably in a museum, it's not going to be exposed to moss.
No, not
Like
anymore.
No, I mean, not like it would be outside.
Because if you want to see the runestone, you go to Alexandria, Minnesota, and they
Wow.
have a museum there. And the runestone is there in the museum. And from what I've read, it's a really good little museum. They said besides having the runestone, they've got
Wow.
a bunch of old buildings that they've brought there, old homestead buildings
Yep.
and things. And they've talked a lot about the Scandinavian people that live there and how they live there in Minnesota. So I guess if we ever get to Alexandria,
We'll
besides
check it out.
seeing the
Hey,
runestone,
that would be a name that road.
that's a long one.
Oh yeah, they'd never know where we were going. Check us at the big river. Check us going across the big
Yeah.
river. Wow, that is just incredible.
So this guy that was trying to refute it by saying that it was possible that, Ullman would have had tools where he could have done this,
Okay.
made this runestone. However, he had a neighbor, Mr. Flotten, and we've heard that name around here, that lived right next door to him, and in fact, he was like maybe 500
Wow.
yards from where it was near the property line there, where the stone was actually dug up, and he thought it was absolutely authentic and didn't see that Ullman would have had the time to sit there and carve this. So again, we don't know.
Well, it's all speculation.
It is.
And so what's your opinion? I mean, I haven't done the extensive amount of research that you have and actually watching controversial programs that dispel or dismiss or agree that this is something that actually happened. What's your opinion?
Well, like I say, the last guy I watched, and it was a quite scholarly person that was studying, runology and everything. And I liked what he said. He said, you need to keep an open mind on this.
Yeah.
He said, it's possible. It's
Right.
possible. And it's also possible that it's a hoax. And after all these years, they have never proved it or disproved it.
Well, there you go. Now you all have a non-answer as
There isn't
to
an answer.
as to whether or not the runestone found in Minnesota is real,
Was it actually, carved by
or is it a hoax?
Scandinavians that had gotten into bad, bad shape where they were? And like I said, it's possible because they were good explorers.
Right.
They were fearless people. But also that they had a track record of not getting along with the Native Americans.
And it's a bad thing if you can't get along with your neighbors, so be nice to your
Be
neighbors.
nice to your neighbors. It's always a good idea to be nice to your neighbors.
That is just incredible.
Because that was something that they never learned. And like we said, I was
They
reading.
never learned?
They never learned to get along with people, to play nice.
Well, and you know what, Nancy, as time passes, more discoveries are being made here in the United States about things in history that we had never counted on or thought were legitimate and are coming to fruition.
Well, right, yeah.
And so for us to think that only the Native Americans visited or were here, that's kind of narrow thinking, especially when there were bigger ice sheets and,
There was a lot going
there's a
on.
lot of activity that we as Europeans who immigrated here, right, in history,
Yeah.
our families did sometime, a lot more went on than what we can claim credit to.
And it's like I say, it's like he said, you got to keep an open mind. It could have happened. It could have, but it could have not happened too. But I can say the takeaway is to kind of examine the ideas and the possibilities.
And keep an open mind.
And to not think that, when I was a little kid, it was Columbus, right? Columbus was the first person.
You
here.
betcha he was.
Yeah. But now they have found, that's just a lot of bunk.
Yeah.
And besides the Vikings having come to North America, there's also legends about a Welshman, Prince Maddox.
Well, isn't there even some speculation that Polynesians made it
Yeah.
as far?
Sure, they were also, in fact, great navigators.
The seafaring. There's a bigger history, which means we get to do more history files.
And we will, because as I was studying all this, I read about St. Brendan. He was an Irish monk.
Oh boy.
And there is pretty good chance that he actually, with his monks, got to the United States way before everybody did too.
There you go.
In March for St. Patrick's Day, we will talk about St. Brendan the Navigator, because that's another fantastic story, and stories, a lot of stories are usually rooted in some kind
And
of
something true.
some reality.
Something
And
true.
these sagas that were written down and recited, well, it was pretty easy to change a word here or there.
Oh,
over
right,
the years,
right.
But still, there had to be some basic, basis to these stories, stuff that actually happened.
For it to carry forward, definitely.
Yeah.
And so now we'll wrap up our time on the History Files.
And what we're going to do is I'm going to tell Mary, now the next time you and Bruce are out, putting in fence posts or clearing out some stumps or something, you keep an eye open for
I'll be looking for a rock.
inscribed stones, and the
Yeah.
same with everybody else.
That's right. Look
Keep an eye
to your
open.
feet. You
just-
never know.
You never know what could turn up here. We're not that far from the Mississippi. We could have had
Oh.
explorers coming up or down the Mississippi.
Absolutely.
In their little Viking boats and everything.
You just never know.
It's a great possibility. And so I guess we'll have to end the Kensington thing. It's a fascinating story. And
Check it
like
out.
they said, you
Check your
just
backyard.
keep an open mind on this. And keep your mind open on this, because there are possibilities for and against. And if you go on YouTube, there's all kinds of people, presenters there. And they're all very interesting, and they all make a good case.
And they all have their own little twist.
And they all refute each other, so It's great. So I guess that's the story so far of the Kensington Runestone, and it is over there in Alexandria, Minnesota, which isn't too far, I don't think, from like Fergus Falls and
Not too far, no.
yeah, and Fargo and over in that area.
Now today you have the device that you say Alexandria, Minnesota, and it'll tell you how many miles and
Yeah.
how many minutes till you get there.
And it'll, if you say the museum in Alexandria, it'll get you to the
Right
front door.
to the front door.
Now, Mr. Ullman died in 1935, and as far as they can tell, he never made any money off of this.
$10.
Yeah, apparently.
$10, and the historians are still talking about him and his fieldstone.
Yeah, so he may have, who knows, maybe he did.
If
Maybe
he-
somebody else had done it 100 years before him and got it. Who knows? We
Well, but if it was, there goes my,
no.
see, there goes my
there
helmet.
goes the horns.
Well, you know, it just slid right off my head. You know, if it was buried and wrapped around tree roots,
Yeah,
it probably had to be old.
right. They figured it was a poplar tree, and they grow fairly fast.
Yes,
But they figured that it had to be at least 40 or 50 years old.
The tree.
At least, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
huh?
So again,
A dust storm probably blew it in,
yeah, right.
covered up the stone. The
Yep.
tree started growing.
yeah, yeah.
You know, because those poplars, they're known to be a pioneer species.
So anyway, I guess like you say, we'll have to wrap it up here and say that keep an open mind.
We'll see you next time.
This is the History Files.